Hey, Jeremy, can you hear me?
I can.
Your hardtail host now, so your part comes up as some you can share your video. Sound good?
Say that again.
Yep, I got video.
Hey, Chandler.
Hey, good shit. Good. I heard something from the very beginning.
Yeah. Gotta be,
Are you doing it?
yeah. Yeah, the slide did not go, I got very fast when you drive, so I ended up driving. I ended up driving every time I was coming. So I got to play last night. Yeah, it was a long drive, but, yeah, they were gonna get me in after that. And so I ended up driving.
Jeremy, are you going first? You know?
Yeah, you know, drive up.
They were going to do it and then advance it on their end.
You're gonna let them.
I think that's going to be the easier way to do it than to switch.
Okay.
As long as they share it over there.
You know, everybody go through.
And this was kind of cool having two presentations on one day. Because literally, I'm sticking my head, like, I don't think I'm on all day. And so I pull my head out, and I've got all of it in my head. And the whole thing. Unfortunately, well, actually, the guy from Corvino was here this morning. Yeah, and he was asking me a lot of questions about the data. So there was at least one person who was interested in that.
Jeremy, can you hear me?
You try and talk to me?
Yeah, make sure you can hear us here.
I can faintly hear you.
Okay, maybe we'll turn the volume so you hear whoever speaking. I'm speaking right directly to the mic right now.
I still faintly hear you.
Are you presenting first? Do you know?
I'll be presenting first, and then Chandler will present second, and then I'll just tell him when to advance the slides. So if you want to put the slides up on your end, and we'll have him advance the slides.
Okay.
Put all that into the model so we can use it on this thing. And also the ITCS. Yeah, and they have it. That was, we had to go back. They were trying to just cut the data for the counties that have their reports. And so we had to go back and say, well, actually, they wanted all the truck data. So they went back and got it. So I think they're going to get a lot of people that cutting all the different models as well. So yeah, we were talking about getting to get out this part of the country. Kentucky and other states that borders a lot of other states. Yeah, because we were going to, we were trying to get them. They're doing a Remy model on Illinois. They just finished their traffic model. And we were trying to get on that. They decided not to pursue it, but there's a lot of the Illinois economic thing, what Kentucky is going, and also Ohio. Like some more of these things should be done in school time sessions because there are all these different states that are looking at the same relationships. And like Kentucky just bought this big first thing. So should Illinois really go and get another one? And I'm not gonna tell the calls that, but actually they have suggested that they would gladly do like one thing for 3 days. Yeah, I'm not gonna- Well, Kentucky with ITTS. You know, Look at that. Yeah. I did it. Oh, you're good. I just did all the crap up. We're good to go. Screen share. Yes. Can you hear us, Jeremy?
I can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you good. We got video.
Yep.
Can you see our video as well?
Yes.
1 second, we'll get started. I think we're good to go. I gotta go.
All right, it's 1:52, so we get started on the 150 session. This is the KYTC Riverport study. It's background on this project. It's a very important project for us. Started about 18 months ago. Metro Analytics with the consultant, handled through the division of planning with Jeremy Edgeworth as our project manager. So I'll read a couple of bios. Jeremy serves as the freight rail waterways coordinator for the transportation cabinet. Mr. Edgeworth previously served as a freight rail and waterways coordinator from 2007 to 2013. He returned to this position in June 2018 after working 5 years for the Kentucky General Assembly. We're very thankful to have Jeremy. Jeremy has a Master of Urban Planning degree from the University of Louisville. Our second speaker is Chandler Duncan with Metro Analytics. Chandler has led more than 68 transportation economic studies in the last 9 years. He has been the principal investigator or principal analyst in 8 NCHRP, TCRP investment management guidebooks and best practice studies, and has conducted more than 5 studies into Kentucky's transportation economy and has played a lead role on waterborne transportation economic studies ranging from small private port breakwater studies to serving as principal economic modeler on a myriad study of the Panama Canal widening impacts on the U.S. economy. All right, that being said, I guess Jeremy is going to kick us off, and it's all yours.
Thank you, Mikhail. So welcome to the Kentucky Riverport's Highway and Rail Freight Analysis Study Session. As Mikhail said, I am Jeremy Edgeworth, Freight, Rail, and Waterways Coordinator for the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet's Division of Planning. I am the project manager for the study. Mikhail Pelfrey, the illustrious director of the Division of Planning, is the deputy project manager for this study. For the consulting team, as Mikhail said, Chandler Duncan, the managing partner with Metro Analytics, is the project manager, and Jimmy McDonald, freight practice leader with Metro Analytics, is the deputy project manager. Next slide. To provide some geographical context, Kentucky has 1,662 miles of inland waterways, 1,020 of which are commercially navigable, ranking us 4th in the nation. Kentucky is surrounded on 3 sides by the commercially navigable rivers of the Mississippi, Ohio, and Big Sandy River, and we also have the Tennessee, Cumberland, Green, and Licking rivers able to move freight. Kentucky's geographic location provides us great advantages in being at the center of a vast inland waterway network and at the confluence of several critical inland waterway routes. Next slide. Kentucky's waterways are supported by 11 public river ports, 7 active ports, and 4 ports at differing stages of development. They range in size from smaller agricultural hubs providing fertilizer and gathering the grain of the local farmer to large players in the world aluminum markets being listed on the London Metal Exchange. They move heavy steel coils on and off the river for manufacturing and provide warehousing and distribution for companies like Kimberly-Clark that proved critical during the great toilet paper shortages of 2020. These ports provide critical connections moving goods on and off our rivers. Next slide. Kentucky's 7 public river ports are supplemented by 162 private river terminals. These are publicly owned terminals that provide many of the same services as our public river ports, moving goods on and off the rivers, but often are developed for a single commodity. One of our newest terminals is being built by Nucor Steel in Brandenburg, Kentucky. This greenfield marine terminal is being developed to service the new Nucor plate steel facility and will eliminate over 1,000 monthly dump trucks delivering raw materials to Nucor and 200 monthly tractor loads transporting finished steel products into markets in Kentucky, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Pennsylvania, Arkansas, and Tennessee. Next slide. But not everyone has a waterway in their backyard. To help move freight on and off of our waterways, our public ports and private terminals connect to a network of over 2,600 miles of rail throughout Kentucky. Kentucky serves as an important hub connecting 5 Class 1 railroads in the western part of the state, while a network of Class 2 and Class 3 railroads fill in the gaps to efficiently move freight within our state. Our rail network provides access to the greater markets outside of Kentucky to places like Chicago, New Orleans, and the ports on the East Coast. Next slide. But not everyone has a waterway or a rail line in their backyard. The first and last mile connection of our freight network rests on our public road network. Kentucky has over 80,000 public road miles that provide those critical first and last mile connections. Almost every address in Kentucky can be accessed by our public road network. And while our public and private ports can reach into the large metropolises of the eastern portion of the United States using this road network, often the impact of our public and private ports is more regional. Next slide. We refer to this as the Riverport hinterlands. These are the areas you can reach within a 90-minute drive of our public ports. Here you can see all the counties that can be reached from our public river ports by road within 90 minutes. The region of our public river ports extends into neighboring Tennessee, Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, and West Virginia. Next slide. So while you may not have a port in your backyard, the ports have a regional benefit to all of its neighbors. This graphic may be familiar to some, but one 15-barge tow and towboat which is commonly seen working our inland waterway network, moves the freight equivalent of 6 locomotives and 216 rail cars. This same 15 barge tow moves the equivalent to 1,050 large semis and tractor trailers. Looking specifically at the freight moved by waterways in Kentucky in 2018, 108 million tons of freight valued at $11.9 billion moved on Kentucky's inland waterways. This would be the equivalent of adding 2.7 million trucks annually to our roadway network without the contribution of our waterways. So the question becomes, how do we do more? How do we do more effectively use our waterways? Next slide. In 2018, the governor in his keynote remarks at the Kentuckians for Better Transportation Conference challenged the state transportation community to find better ways to utilize our waterways. The public Riverports and the Kentucky Association of Riverports took up the challenge and began the process of beginning a new study. They drafted the framework for a new study to address the governor's challenge and approach the leadership of the Transportation Cabinet and the Cabinet for Economic Development, thus kicking off the Kentucky Riverport, Highway, and Rail Freight Analysis Study. Next slide. The study began in April 2020 and is expected to be completed by the end of October 2021. It is a $1 million effort with Metro Analytics as the prime contractor, with IHS Markit providing the critical data analysis, QK4 providing the engineering experience and local knowledge, and Razor Communications rounding out the project team, providing the public relations and marketing skill set. I'll now turn it over to Chandler to tell you more about Metro Analytics, as well as talk about the framework for the study. Chandler.
Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you everyone here for inviting me to be in the partnering conference this week, and also inviting our community of Metro Analytics and all of our partners to be part of this really important and exciting effort. Metro Analytics, just to introduce our group, Metro Analytics is a community of about 30 different members from throughout the United States. It's made up of subject matter experts and thought leaders from throughout the country, particularly in areas of freight, transportation economics, and engineering. We are particularly involved in transportation research in areas related to how we invest our transportation dollars, the impacts that we get for that, and what that investment looks like and how that changes over time. We've been very involved with a lot of the research publications, as Mikhail had pointed out. A couple of our upcoming publications we've been involved in with applied research are areas of investment management, multimodal resilience. We have the National Guidebook on integrating resilience into transportation networks coming up. Metropolitan planning, we have an innovation database for MPOs coming out later this year through the Transportation Research Board. Also, right-sizing transportation investments, a whole line of research, and how you match the infrastructure portfolio to the economy to get the most efficient mix of modes and other outlays to the way the economy currently is and where it's headed, as well as visualization of transportation performance. And a lot of these things come together in terms of what we're doing with the Kentucky Riverports, along with the economic impact and market analysis that's going on. So as we enter into the Kentucky Riverport study, as Jeremy had indicated, there are a number of goals and objectives that we've been pursuing with the Riverports and the whole community of interest here. One of the big things is guiding investment and promotion of the ports. Those things go very much hand in hand. Obviously, promoting something entails having the right product. So what we invest in and what we promote go together in a lot of ways. Also enhancing the efficient utilization of the ports over time, leveraging ports for economic development, promotional and marketing materials for the Riverports, quantifying and understanding Kentucky's waterborne freight market today and in the future, as well as providing data for the statewide model on freight movements, understanding how what's happening on the other modes like water and rail, how that relates to what you see on the highway network and on the corridors. And then also identifying and prioritizing funding opportunities related to Riverports and other complementary investments. The Riverport study process that we've been engaging in since we began over a year ago, it really started with understanding the markets in Kentucky, understanding how that market works, particularly the water transportation markets and the other markets that it touches. And then understanding the economic development process, understanding how that is changing, what is driving it, where it's headed. That was a particular challenge because we were doing this during the post-COVID recovery, and a lot of things were moving as we were doing that. And ultimately taking what we know about that change to understand what case there needs to be for investment. How do we invest in that change? And also, how do we understand the investments that other actors are going to make? How do we understand the investments that, whether they be governmental actors or potential customers and consumers of Riverport services, how do we understand that behavior and what's going to drive that in the future? and how that's going to affect our transportation performance, how it's also going to affect the economic result that we might see based on what we do with our Riverport infrastructure. And ultimately telling the story. This is kind of what the phase that we're really coming into here right now is how do we get this into the deliverables, the reports, all the different narratives and materials that are going to tell the story and explain to a number of different audiences what we have learned through this process. So to kind of talk a little bit about what we have learned in the tasks that have been completed that might be of interest to the broader community here. But in the first task, we looked at the existing role of the Kentucky Riverports in the freight economy. That is, before we could really understand where the economy is headed, we had to understand what's going on right now. How does it really work? And we came to appreciation of the way that the Riverports do connect Kentucky to the national and global economy. We knew that to begin with, as Jeremy pointed out. We started quantifying that. We started understanding how Kentucky's waterways carry over 80 million tons of freight each year, with over $18 billion. We also saw that about 19% of the tonnage in Kentucky is moving by water, but only 3% of the value on Kentucky's transportation system, showing that water is really a very economical way of moving commodities that often are not necessarily the most expensive commodities, but you can move a lot of tonnage for not a lot of money. The other thing is that 59% of the jobs in Kentucky, when we looked at what was happening in the economy and economic development, 59% of the new jobs in Kentucky actually were associated with new business locations. This is suggesting that there's a lot of new business activity happening in Kentucky, which suggests that there are a lot of potential opportunities that new businesses in Kentucky can be Riverport users, and that there is an opportunity to make the Riverport market part of a new business community in Kentucky over a number of years, if we can integrate what we're doing with the Riverports with what we're doing with economic development. Also, we came to understand that growth in manufacturing, food and beverage, trade, tech, logistics, aluminum, and other sectors that has been occurring, that those are all sectors that are trafficking in waterborne commodities. And that's a trend that has already been occurring, and we looked in the future, we'll talk more about how that will likely continue. We also learned, we looked at the existing economy, that Kentucky's current $500,000 annual port funding level is less than some other states, but it is more than some states that don't invest anything. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. The kind of thing that we see by doing that, reflecting on what we've learned, is we're able to get some business intelligence. This is an example of something that was presented at one of the events that we had back in that phase one, back in the fall. Here you can actually see where does the freight economy show up in Kentucky. The map at the top is really showing where is Kentucky producing its business output? Where is Kentucky producing the things that it makes and sells? The yellow, as you get closer to yellow and gold, you're getting a higher concentration of business output in Kentucky. And then the lower map is showing where do you really have the dependence on freight. In other words, the areas that are shown in yellow on the lower map are the areas that actually per dollar of what you make and sell, you're spending more on freight. So this is really showing you, okay, where are you actually having the incidence of freight costs? And that could be because of the industry mix, or it could be because of the cost of actually serving some areas. The bar charts, which you could study a little bit more in the presentation, you can find this slide on the website as part of the Summit One materials. What you see, and I won't go into too much detail, but the other examples of the kinds of things we learned, the upper bar chart here is showing us, for example, we were able to look and see that the orange lines in the upper chart basically show for each industry, the industries are shown in the labels at the bottom. The orange, the deep orange, the brighter orange is shown within each industry to make a dollar of output, how much of the employment or how much of the economic activity in that industry do you rely on freight to make per dollar of output. You see that some industries, for example, like education and healthcare, you can produce a lot of education and healthcare without having to spend a lot of money on freight transportation. And on the lower table, you can see that if you are doing that, the golden color that shows water, that bright orange shows water, you're not really using a lot of water transportation, for example, when you're doing education and healthcare services. But in Kentucky, what you can see if you study this closely enough, you'll see some of these really important sectors, like your agriculture and excavation industry, your utilities that everything else depends on. a lot of your manufacturing, a lot of the backbone in Kentucky's economy do rely on a lot of output from waterway transportation. That's because of fuel and some of these other commodities that are moving a lot of tonnage in Kentucky. So what we looked at was really, where does Kentucky depend on the waterway transportation system? What does that dependence look like? Once we understood that, that led us into task 2, which really is what we were doing in the spring. And we learned that the top 5 commodities, and this is typical of a lot of states, comprise 89% of today's Riverport market. One of the big things that we learned also was that those fossil fuels, and we really already knew this, but we really looked at the fact that the fossil fuels, petroleum, crude, coal, they're accounting for nearly half of the market right now for the waterway transportation system. You also do have aggregate and grains and chemicals, you have other things today. And when you look at the future in the IHS market forecast, we had the market forecast, the same company that does the market forecast for the Secretary's Office at USDOT, the largest market forecasting company actually in the world that does more market forecasts than any other company on the planet, was looking at a couple different scenarios. We found that yes, the freight market is going to grow in Kentucky to 2045, but the waterway transportation market is not going to grow because the coal and the fossil fuels are not going to be moved by water. If present trends continue, there's going to be a question about what the market for the waterborne transportation facilities in Kentucky is going to look like. And that really draws our attention to the future. And what we learned also when we looked at the commodities, what commodities move by water, where are they, how are they moving in Kentucky, and what's changing. We also did learn that about half, more than half of the commodities that are on trucks in Kentucky right now are commodities that can be moved by water. And so this is just a bar chart representation of what is happening between 2018 and 2045. And we saw that we looked at 3 different scenarios: optimistic, pessimistic, and sort of the most likely scenario. And there again, if you look at the bottom set of numbers, you see that the waterway transportation could decline by as much as 10.7% if the river ports are not capturing other types of transportation, or other markets, rather, I should say. And then here, this is where we talk about, this is looking at a thematic map where we're able to assign a lot of what we see in the future markets onto Kentucky's highway network. And what we looked here was we classified the commodities. We were able to update all of the traffic, the combination truck traffic estimates in Kentucky's statewide traffic forecasting model. So the model now has a much more updated set of truck traffic numbers than it had before, but it also has a way of classifying which of those are divertible to other modes based on the type of commodity it is. And this thematic map, the pink shade, basically indicates what share of the traffic on some of Kentucky's major corridors are in commodities that do travel by barge. Of course, the sourcing and where it's going, where it's coming from, whether it's even a waterway, is a valid question. The yellow lines actually indicate things that are currently moving on some of Kentucky's major highway corridors that actually are moving between cities that have Riverport connections. So we see that even on the truck system, there is a market of divertible commodities now and in the future, and this is actually up to 2045. You would see more of that when you look at rail, because a lot of those agricultural commodities, a lot of the fuels and grains and things like that are actually moving on the rail. Also, when we look at the future, we can look a little bit more at where the market is changing, where it's likely to be. Here we can see that in the yellow areas, you can see where the growth is in the divertible trade commodities that are being traded with Kentucky. And you can also see in the yellow areas where that decline is the steepest, and in red rather. So this gives just another indication of rather the deeper red is basically where the larger growth in the markets is, right? So you can see that some of the areas are declining, but there are some pockets where there is significant increases in overall growth in at least those commodities that are potentially convertible to rail. Another feature of what happens when we look at the future and we look at the future market, and this could be of interest to anyone who's looking at traffic patterns in Kentucky overall. These are basically what you call dot densities. We got this for every one of the river ports in Kentucky. The dots basically are showing the distribution of where the port's market is located, the goods that are being handled by a port, where are they located and where are they growing? So the bigger the dot is, the more tonnage handled by the port is traded with that location. The brighter the green, the more it's going to grow. The darker the red, the more it's going to decline. And so you can get an idea for each of the 11. This example is from Owensboro. So this allows us to see a little bit more about where Kentucky's river ports are going to be trading in the future and how the market is changing to help understand what those trading partners look like. So as you go through this process, that leads us to task 3. And this is what's really been going on this summer is engaging stakeholders with future needs and opportunities. The consulting team had made an initial round of visits to the river ports back in the fall, went back out in the spring with these forecasts in hand, and really looked at the port properties, looked at the infrastructure there, had a lot of discussion about, okay, what can we invest in? What do we want to invest in? What investments make sense for us? What would an investment package for the ports look like? What would market capture look like? What's the rationale for investing? That was really only the beginning of a conversation. The visits occurred right after a summit that occurred in March. And after those visits, there was an ongoing dialogue that actually continued all the way through August, leading us into an investment needs picture that was discussed at a summit last week, where all of the stakeholders in the river ports looked at investment needs and investment opportunities. One of the things that led to is it led us to the opportunity of understanding really what the investment opportunity looks like in terms of dollars, and also understanding the kinds of benefits and the kind of payoffs that may need to occur or that can occur if we do fully invest in Kentucky's river ports, which is going to give us the basis for the business case in what we're really talking about when we talk about port investment. There are 3 different investment levels that come out of that discussion, one of which is a preservation level. This is a 5-year investment level. We talked about $12.3 million to basically keep what we have in the Kentucky river ports. That's funding is identified for that. That is keeping what we have. It's basically spending money, defensive investment, spending money so that the river ports don't have to spend more money just to keep the lights on, pretty much. It's basically preventing things from falling apart. Then there's a higher investment level, an additional $42 million if you're really going to optimize and modernize and have everything really operating at state of the art to be competitive and to actually generate more efficiency on the port property, but it wouldn't necessarily change the market dynamics. It wouldn't necessarily attract that modal capture or new markets. But then there's an additional $134 million investment that you could make if you really wanted to start positioning and chasing new markets and actually moving away from that fossil fuel market into some of those new sectors. So those are the kind of, that's not a BC ratio, my apology for that heading. That is just a undiscounted 5-year capital outlay for the list of projects that they had come up with in those categories. That level of funding is not unheard of. Kentucky, and that is funding from all sources, not just from Kentucky's grant program. If we look at what some of the states are spending, you can see there are some states, particularly states that have Great Lakes and waterway systems or oceanfront states, like for example, Florida with their $44 million program, or Illinois has a very large program, Ohio. But at the same time, all of the dollars certainly don't have to come from the state. One of the things, and this is something that can be found on the website, if you look at the Summit 3 proceedings on the KYTC website, there's an analysis, this comes from the U.S. Maritime Administration, of the fact that, there are $417 billion out there. And so there's all of these different federal funding sources that exist, whether they be for infrastructure, for resilience, for economic development. Many of them are available for rural areas and places like where the Kentucky river ports are located. However, even 1% of that would be significantly more than what you necessarily need to make a lot of the investments. But every one of these investments is not eligible for every one of these programs. So one of the significant needs being identified in this study is the need to really go in the final analysis and look and say, okay, where are we going to go and shop for this funding? And what do we need to do to invest to make sure that we can actually get the bigger ticket items that we want in Kentucky that are going to qualify for that funding? And how do we make the case for where that's going to come from? And this case becomes even more more interesting when we start looking at a new federal transportation bill. And actually, as we speak right now, in one of the technical memoranda, we have within Metro Analytics, we have a former, actually former chief innovation officer from U.S. Federal Highway Administration is actually writing on one of the tech memos right now, taking apart the federal transportation bill to look at those opportunities in light of some things that happened at last week's summit. So looking at exactly which programs are from Kentucky and how they're going to, how we're going to position for them is a significant part of what's happening right now. But if you look at this, you could just see that for each of these investment levels shown in green relative to yellow, which is just 1% of the federal funding that's been out there, there are ways to get there. So if we look at essentially the next task we're getting into, which is happening right now, looking at scenario impacts and looking at a preferred scenario and really looking at, say we can do it, say we pull it off, say we do actually invest in a preferred scenario, we accomplish the market capture. Why does anybody care other than a bunch of Riverport directors? Why does the rest of Kentucky care? Why does the rest of the country care? Why does Kentucky's business community care? Well, there are a lot of reasons to care. One of which is that, as you can see, that preservation level, for every dollar you spend of that 12 million, you get about $1.72 back because you're just saving yourself from having to spend more money on having stuff fall apart. But when you can optimize the port efficiency for every dollar you spend, on average, you might get $2.24 back just by estimating what you save because you're not having to spend so much money to operate the thing. And that's more money that you've got out in Kentucky's economy. But if you achieve the new market position, then you can actually save potentially $3.41 for every dollar you spend because of the vehicle miles, the vehicle hours that you save, the crashes that you save, the emissions, and the other performance benefits on the highway network, the rail network, a lot of the things that Jeremy was talking about in his presentation. And those things move on to create gross domestic product, jobs, wage income, not only in Kentucky, but actually about 72% of all those benefits accrue outside of Kentucky. So you're in a position to go to Washington, to go to your neighboring states and say, look, guys, if we can capture Riverport traffic in Kentucky, we can save millions of dollars for our sister states because we can take a burden off of their transportation system. And we anticipate that there will be an opportunity to have that conversation from what we're finding in this study. So where do we go? Our success roadmap gets us into the market capture concepts. It's not enough to just build the infrastructure. The Riverport directors, the economic cabinet, the other actors are going to need to actually go capture the market. Just having the product or finding a way to pay for the product doesn't mean people are going to use the product. So we're going to have to look at market capture product. What are the firms in those industries that the Riverport directors are very interested? It's not enough just to know aluminum products from a certain market might be a good market for us. They need to find some next steps. Which aluminum companies? How do we talk to them? So looking at how the ports can leverage the economic development process, promotional materials and resources. There's a marketing toolkit being developed. Executive briefing materials. Who are the people that need to understand what we're learning here? How does it relate to the other things we do in our other programs? And the implementation resources about who needs to do what. What does the economic cabinet need to do? What do local officials need to do? What do the Riverport directors need to do? What can we reasonably expect from our friends in other states or our friends in Washington? These are all important things that come from the process that we're right in the middle of right now. So the next step right now we're looking at new funding opportunities, as I mentioned earlier, for the high impact investments. We're in the process of developing that marketing toolkit in conjunction with the Riverport stakeholders. And what's happening here in September is the marketing toolkit and final report are coming together. The cabinet throughout this month will be looking at and commenting on all of the technical memoranda ranging from the market forecast to the funding position, to the impacts and benefits of investment, to see what we know about that and how that can best be presented. And this, again, as Jeremy said, will be coming out through the cabinet in October. And we're very interested in any input or questions that people may have.
Are there some other state funding mechanisms that you found interest in it that were interest to you in the study? As you said, we have Kentucky Report improvement dollars, it's $500,000. What were some other states funding mechanisms that you found?
Yeah, we did look at like what the levels are in some of the other states. And again, we found that some of them can range from, some of them don't have any, and then some of them are in the millions. And a lot of it depends on what kind of infrastructure they have. It depends on what role it plays in economic development. I think that the indicators, the expectations of return and the strategies for what they're trying to get from those dollars plays a significant role, and how states can rationalize those. I think that one of the things, as far as what other states are doing, there is in one of the reports, it's been in the works for quite a while, because throughout the summer, we've been kind of working, it seemed like forever, on this document that looks kind of at the funding and the investment thing, because we've been talking to the ports about what they want to spend the money on. But there is a state-by-state description of what I think each of these peer states listed on this table are doing. So there'll be a lot of information about that coming out on the website within the next month about what each state is doing. But also within Kentucky, there is a significant discussion about many of the programs that the economic cabinet is implementing also can be relevant as far as both bringing in private investment that can help stimulate the market for the reports, and in some cases create some leverage to get some of the federal dollars.
So like, look like even the most optimistic projections were pretty slow growth. Now you hear about like in trucking that manpower is an issue going forward. Are there any concerns in moving things by the waterways that there's enough bandwidth in the industry to maintain any kind of growth?
There has been, I think that's something that came up in the summit, and within the context of the IHS models, they are treating that as an equilibrium in the sense that when they're forecasting all the way out to 2045, there is at least one of the assumptions of the model is that in the long term, that the labor market does correct itself. So the hope is that if you have labor shortages now, by the time you get to 2045, you will reach a correction. So it doesn't affect what those forecasts are, even though there has been a lot of discussion tactically about when we talk about implementation, making sure that you have the right people in the right place at the right time, because you could potentially tactically miss out on an opportunity to do something just because in the year or at the time that the prospect is there, you don't have the capacity or the people. And that's probably something that we need to look at in the implementation, but it is not an assumption of the forecast that there will be a permanent labor deficiency.
The thing like if you lose, if petroleum and coal falls off, are we training new Riverport captains or Riverboat captains, things like that, if we're worried to be a new work.
Yeah, that's a good input, and it is something that we probably should look at in terms of the marketing toolkit. It was something that, well, I say marketing toolkit primarily because I think that has a lot to do with market capture, what you're talking about, is competitive positioning, and it did come up at last week's summit. It has not been addressed in any of the reports so far.
Hey, Chandler, there's a question in the chat. It says, have you all looked at the environmental impacts of river barge travel compared to other modes?
The impact of river barge travel.
Have you looked at environmental impacts of river barge travel compared to other modes?
Yes, that to some extent. One of the things that is driving the benefit, and this will actually, one of the things, I was actually just looking at this actually before I came in this room, because I see Rebecca back there, she's waiting for a report from, so is Jeremy waiting for a report from me about this. When we look at these benefit numbers, particularly when we look at the new market position, because it's in that new market position, that's where you have the opportunity to potentially reap some benefit. If you can get some truck traffic or some rail traffic diverted over to rail, you're pretty not going to get 100% of everything that you build for. But in as much as you can do it, you do, yeah, what we have is we have the per mile or the environmental impact in terms of emissions in particular, comparatively, per ton mile of moving something by water compared to moving it by truck, compared to moving it by rail. There are official values associated with that year over year that are quantifiable and are quantified, and that is part of the stream of that economic benefit is the savings, at least on the level of emissions. That's the main driver of the part of the environmental benefit that we are able to quantify in the analysis we're doing right now. Any other questions or inputs? All right. Thanks, everyone.
So thanks to everybody for coming. Very interesting subject, both for the vision of planning as well as transportation cabinet. So these guys did a great job for us over the past 18 months. So I see Rebecca out there moving forward by IHS market as well as Rancher Communications. So it's been an outstanding team working for us to try to get this very unique study completed. The last time we did anything like this was back in 2008. And it did lead to the creation of the Water Preservation Advisory Board, as well as that $500,000 stipend that we've got for Riverports currently. So we're very anxious to see what the recommendations and what the results of this study will bring. Hopefully we get some more funding. Hopefully we get some more good recommendations to be able to move this process forward. Congestion on our roadway networks is our roadways are kind of more congested. So and that graphic that Jeremy showed at the beginning about barge traffic, and that's eye-opening. It's we need to take advantage of our place here in Kentucky, utilize them, Ohio River, and be able to move. That's great. So, all right. Well, it is 1 minute to 2:30, so I'll give you a minute back, and I guess the next session start back at 3 o'clock. Thanks everybody for coming. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman.
I got it.